This meeting is being recorded.
Yeah, hello everybody. Welcome to our monthly webinar. I am Betty Kappa, the president of the French American Business Council of West Florida. We help companies and investors to move down in Florida and to grow their business. So today we have Mr. Marc Antoine, who will talk about taxes because this is really the topic right now if you didn't take care of it. So it's about time you should start. And so with Marc-Antoine Meyer de Sadelhofen, I was looking for the last name. Thank you for being here. And it's up to you right now to talk and to introduce yourself. Marc-Antoine is a tax advisor. So very, very lot of information. And this is recorded. So if you want to hear again and see the presentation is in English and you don't feel comfortable because Marc-Antoine also speaks French. And if you feel comfortable for numbers to speak in French, I understand. Uh, don't hesitate to talk to him. Okay. So, Marc-Antoine, thank you.
Thank you so much, Betty. So, my name is Marc Antoine. I've been living in Florida for over 15 years now. Half of it has been spent in Miami, and more recently, over here in Tampa, Fremco has been of great help for me to situate myself and find like-minded people over on this coast and finding good friends. My last name is very German speaking. I come from Switzerland. My family originated from Zurich, but over a few generations, we've moved to Geneva. And I was born in the US, first generation, and I've decided to make my life here with my American wife. And we recently have welcomed our second baby to the world, just about last week. So don't mind me if I sound a bit tired, but she is wonderful. Her older brother is very loving and wants to give her kisses and hugs all the time. So we're very happy with that. My experience is very mixed. I got into this field because I spoke French over at Jade Fiducial on the Miami side. They taught me how to cater to French expatriates and prepared their tax returns, whether they had decided to invest in the US or still had investments back in France, how to navigate those, how to best advise them. There are a lot of very niche problems that come with all of said items, and I will try to cover some of them today. Start with the basics, and then go into some of the niche parts that I know may affect French people a bit more. So I've been working in taxes for coming on 7 years now. I am set to become a CPA ideally this year, and I am starting to become a bit more independent and starting my own book of clients. So if you have questions, just feel free to give me a call. I am always at the ready. And without further ado, let's get on with the presentation. So I want to preface that this presentation is very generalized. It is just to give you an idea and start asking the right questions, bringing up items that maybe you didn't think were relevant before. It is not personalized in any way. And the main objective with today will really be to understand what to look for when it comes to taxes in the US. Now, we'll go into 4 topics, starting with individual taxation. That should affect just about anyone on this call. Everybody has, if you earned over a certain amount of money, you will be required to file a US tax return, whether or not you lived here for that long. But if you have US sourced income, more likely than not, you will have to file a return. And we'll go into business taxation if you're looking to expand yourself, start a business, whether it's just yourself but working independently. Foreign holdings, as in foreign bank accounts, potentially any assurance vie, plan d'épargne de retraite, the retirement accounts in France. They all have very specific identifying features when it comes to the US, and they need to be reported accordingly and be very carefully navigated. And then I'll conclude on bookkeeping essentials, which go into business taxation. A good bookkeeper is hard to come by these days. and I will try to give general resources of why it is a good thing to seek it out and should be advantageous for you to do so. All right. So, US taxes, there's a reason that people like me have a job and that it's that we're always busy. It's a maze. It's very difficult to navigate. It's hard. Uh, I find it interesting in a very nerdy way, but it is definitely complicated and I get lost sometimes too. So I have to refer to my peers on some more specific topics I don't have too much experience with, but it's important to have a good network of people that know what they're talking about, what they're doing. Because there are a lot of opportunities when it comes to tax, a lot of threats to make sure that you avoid, but also a lot of ways that you can pay less in tax or just have it work in your favor. Specifically for France, the double taxation bit can be a bit stressful. I know that all my life my parents always warned me, be very careful. Maybe you want to get rid of your US citizenship later in life because you'll get taxed twice. There's actually a lot that has come forward since then between the US and different European countries and countries around the world really to avoid being overtaxed on your income and just your belongings in general. We'll go over some of the punishing rules that I mentioned. PFICs, I'll refer to them as PFICs. They stand for Passive Foreign Investment Corporations. They can be very sneaky when it comes to qualifying those, but I will dive deeper into it. This is something that I heavily specialized in when I was working at Jade and continue to specialize going forward. It's something I'm very familiar with. And hopefully I can help anyone who potentially has anything like this to navigate it properly. FBAR, foreign bank account reporting. This is not something you get taxed on, but it is something you have to report if you're a resident. I will go into that a little more as well. And expatriation tax, I will stay very vague on this. That is not something I've had to deal with too often, but I'm familiar enough to know that it's a very, pun intended, very taxing process. And for French expats, the best thing you have going for you right now is that there are no state income taxes on individuals. So you don't have to worry about, having to file an extra return for the most part. So that's already a big start for all of you here. You did the right choice by being in Florida. Good job, guys. All right, let's start with individual taxation. So, likely scenarios for a lot of people that have been part of the Framco that I've talked to, that I've seen, they start off as non-residents. You start here on a visitor's visa. You come in for a few months out of the year. Maybe you make a bit of income over here. The IRS specifically only requires you to tax any income that is specific to the US, right? If you make money in the US wants to know about it and tax you accordingly on it. That will be a specific form called 1040 NR for non-residents. Those are usually straightforward enough because you don't have to worry about your global income or your belongings. Now, things change quite a bit once you become a resident. So, a niche distinction that catches a lot of people by surprise I've seen is that this doesn't necessarily being a resident for tax purposes is very different than being an actual resident. You don't have to give up your residency in France for the US to consider you a resident for tax purposes. The way they go about it is, well, if you have a green card, by default, you will be taxed as a resident. You've gone through the process, you have a green card, you're a tax resident. The other thing that people need to watch out for is what's called the substantial presence test. So I have it at the bottom here, how to determine it. The bulk of what you have to keep in mind is that the US considers you to be a resident if you've been in here for over 183 days, weighted over the last 3 years. So what does that mean? Every day of the past year, so say 2025, every day counts as one full day. 2024, they'll count those days as well, but just at a 2/3 of the weight. And then for 2023, they'll count them as 1/3. So weighted together, if all of this adds up to 183 days for the current year, you're a resident for tax purposes, you have to file what's called a Form 1040. So the other thing, which is very much more difficult, at least for tax preparers, I rarely see people who are very familiar with it unless they deal exclusively with expats, are called the dual status returns. So that is a return you'll have to do either once or twice. The first time when you become a resident, the year that you become a resident, you have to file the 1040 NR, the non-resident bit for the first half of the year. until the day that you hit that residency. So that's why it's important to calculate the number of days that you've been in the US and just kind of keeping track of this. Because the moment you hit that threshold, everything else gets taxed by the US, as in your worldwide income. If you have a business in France that generated income that first half of the year, they don't care about it. Other half of the year, you're a tax resident in the U.S. You have to start declaring it and filing about it, and just paying taxes accordingly. But thankfully, Form 8833, which I've listed here, allows you to navigate the tax treaty between, in this case, France and the U.S., and be able to nitpick at some of the items, saying, "Hey, France already taxed me on this. The U.S. has no business taxing me on this." And there are a lot of things to navigate with this. I will not go into too much detail because it is a long document. There's a lot that goes into it. It's very personalized whenever I have a one-on-one discussion of what are your assets, what is your income, what can we do to make sure the US doesn't touch this. And yeah, that should cover it for the individual side. But let me give you this bit of a nightmare looking thing here. This is everything that goes on for the first half of your return. Everything that flows into your return. Let me see. Betty, can you tell me if you can see my mouse navigating through? Yeah, okay. So I've highlighted these. So everything is very important here. But the main things I want to talk about today are relate to businesses. If you want to start a business in the US, there are a lot of things to go into to make sure that you have the most optimal tax strategy, and that you don't pay too much in tax, that you don't get caught by surprise with a surprise filing that you didn't know about, penalized, and just go through an administrative nightmare. There's a lot that goes into it. The red square that I have over here are separate returns. So what does that mean? You have your individual tax return, everything that you do personally. Say I work a job, I receive a tax from my employer. They retained taxes à la source. They withheld taxes. I don't have to worry about too much. This goes right over here. It's very simple for the majority of Americans to just be employed. Taxes are paid throughout the year. They file it. They say, hey, this is how much I made. This is how much I paid in taxes. That's it. All done. I get a refund for however much was taxed over the amount that I should have been taxed. Now, for these over here, they are separate filings, as in they file their own tax returns. Specifically, these three, a partnership, a trust return, or an S corp. I will ignore the trust. This is very niche. I have experience with it, but I don't think it would be too relevant right now. But S corporations and partnerships, they sound intuitive. A partnership, you partner up with a friend, business partner, you start a business, you have it operate it on its own, you generate a good amount of money. The partnership, for the most part, will be considered for the US purposes as what's called a pass-through entity. That means the entity, the partnership, will not pay taxes on its own. What will happen, you have to file the tax return, say how much you made, how much your expenses were, any tax credits that would be taken into account gets filed, and then you and your partner, however many partners you want, will receive a tax form, neatly tell you how much you made, how much your share of the income was, of the expenses and the tax credits. That form then feeds right into this schedule, into your return on your individual return. It's something that goes right into it. So you might ask me, hey, why would I want to have it filed separately? Well, there are quite a few advantages to it. Obviously, tax advantages, because the default treatment. I've heard quite a few people when I went to Fremco events say, "Oh yeah, I filed an LLC." That's it, right? It's its own tax thing. I mean, it's a good tax strategy, right? So starting with an LLC is a great first step. But as I will go into more detail here for business taxation, there are a lot of ways that an LLC can be treated. And all of them have, I would say, their advantages and disadvantages too. So the first one, kind of the default treatment. So if you just created the LLC, did nothing else with it, and it's just you. You just have your name. You didn't partner with anyone. It's just you. You have your own business, and this is what they start with: a disregarded entity. So what that means is the IRS will look at this LLC and just say, "Oh, okay, it's just Marc. I don't have to treat it as something different. It's just Marc. It goes right through. If I go back here, as a sole proprietorship. So that goes through Schedule C, and I'll go into a bit more detail of why that typically is not the best way to go for a tax perspective. What the IRS does when it goes through your individual return, it will make sure that the business that you have gets taxed an additional tax called a self-employment tax. And that goes for 15% of the income that you made from your business. So ultimately, you pay a lot more in taxes going through that default strategy. You just made an LLC. That's all there is to it. So there are a lot of ways that you can, well, a lot of ways. There are some ways that you can avoid this this additional tax, which a lot of people go through and take advantage of. And the first and most popular one I've seen is usually you have an S corporation. So what you have to do for this one, you create the LLC. After that, you have to file this particular form, Form 2553, to elect to ask the IRS, hey, I would like to have this LLC be treated separately. It will be its own tax return. And what the IRS will do more oftentimes than not, you make the election, but I've rarely ever, not even rarely, I've never seen the IRS send a rejection letter unless they have a good reason to. They will send you a letter saying, hey, here's your letter confirming that we approve of your LLC being its own tax entity. And here's the number. So you have a social security number that's to identify your own person. And then you have an EIN, employer identification number. That will be the number for your S Corp. It'll be two different entities. The main advantage of S Corps is that it, for the most part, typically eliminates the self-employment tax. So say you have the exact same operation, as long as you make the S corporation election, run your business through it, you will not have to pay self-employment tax. That's 15.4% of tax that you don't have to pay. So that's usually the default for a lot of people. It's easy enough. It's not very complicated. Creating an LLC in the US, whether you do it through Florida or Delaware, there are a lot of ways to do it that is very intuitive. I would typically recommend going through doing it through the Florida website directly. I will say be very wary of those websites that make you pay $500 for it. It does not do anything in particular to your advantage. It will say that it does, but really it is the same thing as if you just did it yourself directly. And Florida would just charge you $100. That's the default number. Now, the thing to be careful with for S corporations is that you are not allowed to have shares in an S corporation if you're a non-resident. So that is very specifically meant for tax residents of the US. For you to be able to have an S corporation. So that's something to keep in mind, because you might ask me, oh, Marc, well, I became a resident. What happens once, I go back to France and I still have the S corporation and it just keeps operating? What ends up happening is that it turns into a C corp. So the C corp is the default for a lot of non-residents that still want to do business in the US, but usually has the least advantageous tax structure because it gets taxed twice. This is the one of the few returns that is not individual that gets taxed on its own. So the US has had this default percentage for just any income that goes through a C corporation, 21%. That's the default. Any net income that goes through your C corporation will be taxed at 21%. Anything that you want to give yourself outside of the income that you've made will be taxed a second time at the individual rate. It will be considered dividends. So going back to this, I'm sorry if I navigate this and I end up having to refer a lot to this. It will have to be taxed as dividends, whether it's ordinary or qualified, depends on the nature of your business and if the IRS approves of it being qualified. But it will be taxed at this rate. Now, the last and final one, you might ask me, okay, Marc, why do people go for partnerships if S corps are so great? Well, partnerships allow for a lot more flexibility with how you want to set it up. S corps, you can have it as just being yourself, but you can also have it with multiple members, up to 100. You can have 100 maximum S corp members. I've not seen more than 20 at a time, but technically the rule is 100. Partnerships allows for a lot more flexibility in the sense that, say, I work with Sebastian here, and I feel like Sebastian has been working way more than me in the business. I can allow him to have sweat equity built into the business, as in you get to increase your stakes, your number of shares, or the partnership ownership into the business for having worked more than me, and just kind of have that fluctuate over the years. Whether you want to have it, you can split the profits, the losses, or the equity into the business three different ways. Say I put zero money into our business and Sebastian put all the money in it. I'll say, okay, Sebastian, you can have the majority of the profits for the business. I'll take maybe some of the losses. However the agreement can go, there's a lot more flexibility with partnerships. But same as the S corp, it does not get taxed. S corps and partnerships pass through, goes right through to your individual. So your share of the income and expenses goes right to your individual return, however you structure it. So that's always something that you navigate between when it comes to setting up the business, between the two of how you want to set it up. Now, as I mentioned, for the S corps, they're appealing. They cannot be held by non-residents. That's right. Turns into a C corp. Right. And the last thing that I forgot to mention, S corporations over here, eventually, once the business takes off, the IRS expects you to pay yourself a reasonable salary. Now, it is not ironclad in the rules of exactly how that is determined, but they do come after you if you never end up paying yourself a W-2, a payroll, like you just run a salary to yourself. That's the expectation when it comes to S corporations. Now, they won't come after you if your S corporation makes, $500,000 per year. At that point, there's not a lot of wiggle room to pay yourself anything. But if your S corporation is being established, that's where the IRS starts expecting, okay, I should expect to see a salary for the work that you've been doing for your own business. Now, the way that they determine it is by comparing across the board, how much would you get paid if you worked for somebody else doing what you do? So say I'm a tax preparer, I end up doing my own return. I have an S corp for 5 years. I'm doing pretty good. The work that I do would typically get taxed, or I would get a salary of 60, 70,000 a year. It would be expected that my salary should be around that range. It doesn't have to be exact, but if I'm saying I'm paying myself $30,000, the IRS will say, you're trying to dodge the payroll taxes. So they'll come and bring the hammer down and try to get you for that. So it's important to navigate that carefully as you see the health of your business being stabilized over the years. Let's see. Another one, so SMLC, single member LLC. So if it's just yourself, make sure that it will become self-employment tax. And yeah, no, I navigated these already. Oh, and C corporations. So Florida is a tax-free state for the individuals, but if you have a C corporation, you also have to pay taxes for the states. Now, as far as I know, I'm pretty sure most states have a tax in place for C corporation, and Florida is one of them. So that's something to keep in mind if you're trying to navigate the S corporation, but you're not sure if you're going to stay in the US for the foreseeable future. Keep in mind that C corporations, if you want to keep the business going, will have to pay additional taxes on top of the double taxation. So it can be punitive, but if you navigate it carefully, that's something you can take into your planning phase. Now, for foreign holdings, so I'm sure a lot of you, as you come to the US, you've had your French bank accounts maintained. You didn't liquidate everything to jump on the boat and come here. There is something called the FBAR, the Foreign Bank Account Reporting, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, but if not, let me walk you through it a little bit. So the FBAR reporting is done through a different organization than the IRS. So the IRS has nothing to do with that particular reporting. There are no taxes to pay. It is not something that you get taxed on. It is purely informational. You just tell the US government, hey, here's how much I have abroad in this bank account, in this bank account, in this bank account. The reporting limit is across the board, every bank account. If you have 10 bank accounts across I don't know, Crédit Suisse, all the different French banks, if it is above 10,000 US dollars, so you have to convert it, then you have a filing requirement. It's not per bank account, it is across the board. If everything you have abroad is more than $10,000, they will expect to see a reporting. And again, it is purely informational, so it's always a shame when I hear that people fall into this, oh, I didn't know, because they do have two different sets of penalties for either people who did not know that they had a reporting requirement, especially those that have been here 20 years. I remember one of the first phone calls with a client that I had when I started at Jade Fiducial. They said, "Oh, I've been here for 20 years. I never knew that I had to report my 500,000 euros accounts that was sitting in France all these years." The non-willful violations that, as they say, will be up to $10,000 per account per year. So it's up to. So obviously, if you don't have that much, they're not going to charge you the full amount. But obviously, it's something that you want to absolutely avoid. And there are ways that you can come forward saying, "Hey, I just learned this now. I would like to streamline the process of saying, here's what the value of my accounts has been over the years." I have done a few of those, and happy to say on my end, I have not had any negative uh, feedback from the IRS saying, "Oh, they still get hit with a penalty." Thankfully, all of them have had solid reasons to not know that they had a reporting requirement, and the IRS was not the IRS, the U.S. government was feeling generous enough to not impose penalties. Now, if they're feeling a little feisty and they want to prove that you knew about those obligations, but did not do anything to be compliant with them, they will bring down the hammer on you. This is a nasty business that they really dive deep into it and try to accuse you of everything to get the most out of you, where they will hit you with extremely high fees for everything that you have abroad. And what I have seen in some friends, relatives, parents, this leads to them essentially giving up their U.S. citizenship because they were so disgusted by this sudden giant fee that they wanted nothing to do with the U.S. anymore. And then they get trapped with, like I mentioned earlier, the expatriate. Yeah, there you go, George. Never had a client with a F-bar penalty. They make it sound scary, but really, I have not seen it either. Granted, I've not seen really flimsy cases. Most of the time, it really makes sense why they didn't know and that they wanted to do good and be right with the rules. And thankfully, that's always played in their favor. And you know, ultimately, I want to say it's a little overblown, but they always make it sound scary. And I've heard of scary cases where really they somehow managed to prove in front of a court that they did have a willful neglect of their filing reporting. So what does the filing actually include? You'll have bank accounts, but you also have securities accounts. Say you have investments in just across the board, just investments, retirement accounts. Those usually need to be reported as well as part of it. Cash value insurance policy. So I'm thinking assurance vie is a big one that will go into greater detail of what that implies for the US because it is a bit more specific because it's not quite retirement, and the IRS does not give a lot of wiggle room for those ones. And yeah, just accounts held with foreign financial institution. Really, just across the board, if you have monetary incentive in somewhat of a vehicle outside of the US, chances are it needs to be reported there. So the big topic for me, passive foreign investment corporations, PFICs. So what those are is if you have a foreign investment account of where the income is mostly passive, 70% of the income is passive in nature, or 50% of the assets generate passive income, chances are the IRS will say that is a PFIC. You need to do the filing for it to be recorded as such. This one is a bit tricky to navigate because you have to be very proactive with it, for one. As in you have to talk to your tax professional saying, I have these over here. Ideally, you want to tell us right when you become a resident because that's when the filing requirement will become a thing. Think back to once you become a resident, suddenly worldwide income gets taken into account. That's really the moment you have to keep in mind. The moment that hits, you have three options when it comes to qualifying those investments. So I've mentioned assurance vie quite a few times. This is the main one that falls into this trap because I've heard some people say, "Oh, well, c'est pour ma retraite. It's for retirement. It's not really something I want to use right now." I've never seen any favorable passing for it to not be considered a PFIC. So the three options that you have when it comes to PFICs of qualification, and you have to make that decision on year one, is either you make no election, the PFIC will not be taxed. There won't be a tax on it as long as you don't withhold money from it. As long as there's no movement, you will be fine. Now, how does that play if you're intending to stay in the US long term? Then you'll get taxed extremely punitively once you actually want to cash in on your investments, because they will tax it as honestly, the most punitive way. That is the worst one that I've seen. They will uh, they will calculate based on the length of time that you've held it and accumulate a little bit of penalty on every day that you've had it, which, if you're trying to hold it for retirement, is not the best way you want to go about it. Now, that brings me to the other two options, one of which is to what's called mark to market. So you make the election, you pinpoint exactly the value of your investment at that point, and you get taxed on the value, la plus-value, as it fluctuates between that point going forward. So say your investment grows $50,000, you'll have to pay a tax on that as it goes forward. But once you withhold it, you will not have to pay taxes on it. And if it drops in value up to the point that you've elected for it to be, you will be able to deduct that fall in value. But anything that goes beyond that, you will not be able to deduct. So it's really you get taxed on the value that gets added from that point, and you get to deduct it, same thing, up to that point that you elected for it. And the final one, which requires usually some coordination with the French banks, is called the Qualified Elected Fund. So this is usually the most advantageous election you can make. You still get taxed. You still get taxed on a yearly base of the increase, the income that you've made, even if you didn't cash in it. If you have interest or dividends that are accumulating in the account, you have to report those, but you get to tax it at that rate, at that beneficial rates that the US has for those investment. You say, it's as if this was a US investment. I get taxed on the interest and dividends at the preferential rate. And once you sell it, you're able to sell with capital gains and just have it as if it were a US investment. This usually requires a lot more coordination because you need to have the valuation and a lot of more information than they typically give you. So that's something when I worked at Jade that was much harder to come by because it required us to actually be able to communicate with the banks to be able to get that preferential treatment. That usually was something that an election that I made for people that have a lot more and essentially have a good relationship with their banks because they want to keep their business. So they said, "Hey, talk to our US representative. I want what's best for my accounts going forward." So again, those three options really depend on if you want to stay in the US for the long term. A lot of people that I've seen, if they want to stay in the US, say 5 years,
Yes, it is.
they're in rotation.
I'm in a
Go
video.
ahead. Yeah.
Just a sec.
Oh, okay. Threw me off my group there. If you're in the US for just a rotation, 5 years, I would recommend don't touch that money, but also don't make an election. There's no point in you paying taxes on it if you're just going to go back to France after a bit. I mean, same thing for 20 years. If really you think, yeah, I'll spend a decade here, I just make sure that I stay here and don't touch those investments because I know they're very advantageous for French citizens. There's a reason the majority of them that came through Jade had those investments because it is something that is beneficial for you for French law. But the US is a different story. Now, there are some treaty clauses that you can use for different types of qualification. The main one that I've seen that gets the best treatment, where you literally just say, per the treatment, this does not get taxed by the US. I don't have to report it outside of this form saying, I acknowledge that I have this. I don't have to say more about it. This is what it is the plan d'épargne retraite, PER. Those ones are usually don't get touched and are perfectly fine because the US recognizes them as actual retirement accounts. The other ones they tend not to because you get to access them much earlier than somebody with a 401k would get to here. And that's the main reason that the US is picky about it, because they say, oh, you get to touch that assurance vie after 5 years. Well, that's not really a retirement account, is it? So that's kind of the main breadth of this topic. It's very complicated for my end to make sure that it's reported correctly, but it's very important that it does get reported correctly because they love to send you letters and say, oh, this was not done correctly, or let me audit your financials and let me see what's going on. Because they love to pick people on this. They've made it complicated on purpose to catch people, probably US citizens who try to invest abroad, to discourage them from even doing so. That was the main reason that this whole system was put in place in the first place. But enough yapping. This is a passion thing for me because that was the first niche thing that I've studied when I was with Jade, and they ended up feeding me a lot of them because I was able to process them correctly, and they recognized that, oh, okay, Marc knows how to do it. Let's just give them all to him. Let's see. Now, for the final bit, bookkeeping. So bookkeeping makes my job much easier as not quite a CPA yet, hopefully later this year, but as a tax preparer, a good bookkeeper it goes a long way. It's a miracle to find a good one these days. The purpose of it is to keep you busy on running your business, making sure that it's run correctly. Most people that I've seen are, great entrepreneurs. They know how to get themselves out there, but bookkeeping is usually the more boring part of the job, and half the time it gets messy and it's hard for me to properly report that for their taxes, whether it's through a partnership, S corporation, C corporation. A big part of my job, sadly, is usually spent cleaning up the books, and that makes me increase the fee for people that I work for, ultimately, because I have to spend the time to clean it up, because I can't just submit what you gave me to the IRS saying, here you go, you've depreciated land or something like this. It's there's usually some little things that get missed, but a good bookkeeper, whether you hire them on a monthly basis to give you an idea of what your business is looking like month to month, quarterly, if your business activity doesn't warrant a month-to-month thing, or even annually, if you think it just needs a cleanup once a year. There's a lot of benefit when it comes to bookkeepers in your life. And any client that we've had that has a solid bookkeeper just makes our job very easy. Our fees are usually much reduced if we don't have to spend much time, because CPAs work on an hourly basis. They'll give you an upfront fee, but then they'll say, hey, if I end up having to spend 5 hours instead of the 1 hour working on your return, that has to be reflected on your bill. And a good bookkeeper usually costs much less than a CPA and makes their job much quicker and faster. Other advantages, obviously, is seeing how your business is doing, getting a good idea of, okay, here are my financials on a month-to-month basis. They allow you to take out loans much easier, because banks will want to be seeing how your business is doing on a year-by-year basis. Typically, they will ask for tax returns as well, but having a good set of books is usually something that goes a long way for banks as well. And thankfully, he is not here today, but we have a promising bookkeeper that speaks French, Maxime, who I hope will make it this far in the presentation once he watches the recording. But he's very eager to get himself started and be a good point of contact for any French speakers that want to get themselves started. Really focus on the setting up your business, really pushing that idea forward, and keeping some of that more boring item kept in check. Make sure that you have a good idea of what goes on in your business that you maybe wouldn't see right up front. Maybe you have too much debt. Maybe you're actually doing much better than you thought. There's a lot that can be said about bookkeepers and what they can do for your peace of mind, but also for your financial health and tax health in particular, because that then helps me also navigate the next thing I was going to mention, the kind of tax timeline over the year. So this is more specifically for business owners that have their own return. Typically, you don't like a regular employee, you would not have taxes paid on a month by month basis, right? You make your money, you have it go to your bank account, that's it. So the way that the IRS works when it comes to these is that they require or recommend that those business owners pay their taxes on a quarterly basis. So you make quarterly payments to the IRS for your business return ultimately. And the way the timeline starts off, so it might sound counterintuitive to have the fourth quarter payment up here, but this is usually the one to end the year on. Say this is this year, for tax year 2025. You would have made your last payment of the year by January 15th. If you don't have, I would say, somewhat equal payments between the four, or if it's not too close to what you owe, by the time that you file your tax return on April 15th, they will have some time, or if say you decide to ignore Q1, Q2, Q3, and you just do one big one in Q4, the IRS will typically put some penalties depending on what method you choose to recognize your income in. If you just decide to do a bulk payment at the end, they'll still put some penalties if you, oh, hey, you made $1 million throughout the year, but you only decided to pay us at the very end. We're still going to penalize you a little bit. So it's important to have that kind of quarterly meeting with your tax person if you think you had a good year. Now, if your income is very fluctuating, say you had, a much weaker year up until October, and suddenly, oh wow, our year was saved. We just suddenly secured a big client. That's also fine, but you have to let your tax guy know so that he can adjust the penalty worksheet to say, hey, there was practically no income here. That's where the bookkeeper comes into play again. Having that set of books and knowing the health of the business throughout the year allows you to avoid some of those penalties that the IRS wants to set on you. So the pass-through taxes that I've mentioned, as corporations, partnerships, they have an earlier deadline than most, which is March 15th. So for the tax year 2025, you would expect to have your return done by March 15th. You don't have to pay anything to them yet, but you have to get it filed by that point. And then it gives most people just about a month to then have that information from the business return feed into their individual return. And the infamous April 15th deadline that people know and love is when you have to finish your taxes. Now, what surprised me a little bit is a lot of people don't actually know that you can extend both of those returns. So what that means is you're saying, hey, I need more time to be able to finish my filing my taxes. I don't have everything else yet. I need a bit more time. Okay. The pass-through extension goes all the way up to September 15th and your individual one to October 15th. Now, it's an extension to file, not to pay. And that's a key distinction as well. You need to have somewhat of a decent idea of how much you would owe by April 15th so that you can pay that amount with your extension. Say, hey, I think I would owe about this much. I need a bit more time to figure out what that is. Now, when it comes to French returns that I've seen, our busy season is usually around this time because you're waiting on your French tax return, knowing how much you paid for on French taxes, because that will then get reported to the US as well, and they give you a credit on that income. Well, you have to separate, okay, here's how much I made in France, here's how much I paid in taxes in France. I don't owe anything. But you still have to have that information, and it usually comes in the later half of the year. So extension is usually the way to go for French expatriates that are here and that have business in France. And the quarterly payments, the first one is the same day as tax day. It is April 15th. So you can if you owe a bit of money to the IRS that you didn't pay enough in quarterly estimates, you would have to owe a little bit more. Say you pay $2,000, but then you'd have your first quarterly payment that would start from the first 3 months of the year. Say you made $200,000, you'd have to pay taxes on about that amount preemptively. So it's a bit of a navigation, but that's the times when you want to meet with your tax accountant to figure out what needs to be paid and what you can kind of get away with paying maybe a little less, depending on the health. Again, it all works well with one another. Your financial advisor, the bookkeeper, and the CPA, usually it's a good thing for them all to know each other. And thankfully we have Seb over here who another plug from a Framco member here, our beloved Framco member Seb, who usually works very well with with all the CPAs that his clients are related to ensure that things get filed properly and that their tax health is top notch on top of their financial and their investments. It's important that you look at the full spectrum and make sure that your health is covered. And with that said, I think that wraps things up for me. And if anyone has any questions, something that I rambled on, something that people wanted to talk more about, feel free. It's an open discussion for me. I love discussing and planning things with people. But yeah, that would be it for me.
Thank you, Marc-Antoine. And it's nice that you put all the financial advisor, bookkeeper, and yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, that's really big information for everybody. And so,
It's a team effort ultimately, right? It's
yeah, that's
a lot of
really
them want
great.
to stay isolated, but if you're able to have good talks and you actually enjoy talking to the other person and being able
Yeah.
to navigate their profile, it cuts down on a lot of time and makes things better overall. It really does.
Okay, so now we can open for question. Who has question? You can even ask in French if you want. Feel.
On peut aller en français, oui, absolument.
Ouais, ouais. Well, I guess if we don't have it.
Bon,
Oh, okay.
oui, bonjour Christine.
Bonjour,
Christine Babel.
Christine.
Bonjour. Désolée, je ne mets pas la caméra. Je suis
Pas de
dans un
souci.
lieu public, donc c'est le seul endroit
Pas de
que j'ai
souci.
pour me connecter à Wesley Chapel. Voilà.
Ah, pas très loin de moi. Ok.
Ah, ok. Bon, Marc-Antoine, j'ai entendu des choses très intéressantes, même si mon anglais n'est pas complètement fluide pour vraiment tout comprendre dans les détails. Juste ma petite question, est-ce qu'on pourrait
Oui.
envisager une visio ensemble, c'est possible? Ça
Oui, absolument.
m'intéresserait de voir avec vous, parce que
Absolument,
je
ça me
suis
ferait
en
grand
train
plaisir.
de… Donc, ma société est créée en Floride. Je suis en train de lancer mon business. En parallèle,
Ok.
je suis dans une demande de visa E2 investisseur. Et j'ai
Ok.
également une activité en France
D'accord.
et on va dire, des placements en France. Donc, j'ai besoin de voir et pour la société et pour le côté personnel ce qui est le plus pertinent. Et vous m'avez l'air
Bien sûr.
assez, même très calé en la matière.
C'est très gentil, merci.
Donc,
Non, ça me ferait
voilà.
plaisir. Ça me ferait plaisir.
J'aimerais beaucoup, voilà, est-ce qu'on pourrait se caler ça? Alors moi, je suis ici en Floride, donc on est sur le même fuseau horaire pendant 3 semaines, enfin jusqu'au 17 mars.
D'accord.
Enfin jusqu'au 16 mars inclus, puisque je décolle le 17 mars très très tôt le matin.
Ouh, très bien. Donc
Euh,
on pourrait s'organiser ça
comment est-ce qu'on
avant.
peut procéder?
Bah écoutez, vu que vous êtes à Wesley Chapel, vous n'êtes pas très loin de moi, mais j'ai mon numéro personnel sur l'écran. Vous pouvez
C'est ce que je
l'enregistrer,
pense.
et je suis
Oui,
absolument disponible. En ce moment, je travaille de manière indépendante, donc en l'occurrence
d'accord.
parce que je voulais me focaliser plutôt sur l'aspect famille, parce que ma petite fille est née,
Oui.
on va dire, dans un moment qui n'est pas très affordable pour certaines boîtes. Ils disent, bon, lui va prendre congé de
Ah,
paternité au milieu de la saison. Euh,
je
donc,
comprends.
donc voilà. Donc je me suis dit, bon, je me
Ah,
lance un peu. Et je préférais m'axer un peu
bon,
plus sur les Français aussi, parce que c'est un peu plus ma passion de m'occuper de
c'est bien.
personnes comme moi, voilà,
Et
qui parlent la même langue que moi et qui
c'est
essaient
très
de se situer.
pratique pour nous. Oui,
Donc je suis
absolument.
disponible, franchement, je peux venir vers vous comme vous le sentez. Et on
Ok,
peut
bon,
discuter tout
après, moi,
ça.
je
Je
ne vais
viens
pas
avec mon carnet.
rester. D'accord. Moi, je ne vais pas rester sur Wesley Chapel. Hein. C'est juste de
D'accord, c'est
passage
juste maintenant.
là. À
Ok,
partir de demain, je serai. Voilà, c'est juste maintenant. À partir de demain, je serai sur Sarasota.
d'accord.
Bradenton, Sarasota. Mais on
Ok.
peut se faire une visio, hein. C'est pas gênant.
Oui,
J'ai mon
comme.
ordinateur
Non, pas de
là.
souci.
Ce que je fais, je vous renvoie un petit message. Je vous renvoie un petit message et vous me dites vos disponibilités. On regarde ensemble et on fait ça rapidement.
Absolument, ça me ferait plaisir.
Très bien,
Super.
très
Plaisir
bien.
partagé. Voilà.
Mhm.
Merci beaucoup,
Merci.
Christine.
Ben, c'est très bien, Christine, que tu aies fait la connaissance de Marc-Antoine. Surtout que Christine a fait la bonne démarche en contactant déjà Franco avant
Oui, oui,
de faire
toujours.
quoi que ce soit. Et maintenant, elle est
Maintenant,
l'envol, on va dire.
oui, l'envol complet, j'entends ça,
L'envol complet.
on se
Bon,
lance là, c'est bien.
elle était là au
Oui,
Networking Happy Hour hier soir. elle a eu de très bons contacts, elle a discuté avec beaucoup de gens. Donc, c'est, si tu veux, un exemple de personne, de professionnel qui a compris la démarche de faire appel à la chambre de commerce avant de faire quoi que ce soit de son côté tout seul.
Absolument, c'est toujours bon d'avoir un contact et d'avoir justement
Voilà.
bah, de pouvoir
Ah
parce
oui,
que
c'est très bon. Et
Betty
moi, je tiens
elle connaît
vraiment
tout le
à
monde.
remercier. Ah oui, moi, je tiens vraiment à remercier Betty, hein, de son
Oui.
appui, de son soutien. Vraiment, c'est un précieux sésame. Vraiment, je la remercie. C'est très précieux.
De même, je dois sauter là-dessus aussi. Je dois beaucoup remercier Betty. Elle va beaucoup de l'avant pour faire en sorte que bah, qu'on puisse tous avoir nos expertises un peu présentées de l'avant et qu'on puisse tous se soutenir en tant que francophone. J'aimerais bien dire français, mais bon, je ne le suis pas. Mais Georges, absolument, on pourrait. Je
Oui.
sais pas si elle est disponible à télécharger. Mais je peux l'envoyer.
Elle sera sur le site framco.org.
D'accord, voilà.
Vous pourrez regarder et télécharger. Mais Georges, on peut vous l'envoyer
Oui,
après
dès qu'on finit.
Amandine va envoyer éventuellement la présentation. Le recording, c'est sur le site. Mais si vous
D'accord.
voulez la présentation, même le slide, à ce moment-là, on peut vous l'envoyer par email. D'accord? Comme ça,
Ok, parfait. Mais regarde, on l'a là.
il y aura les coordonnées de tout le monde, Marc-Antoine, Sébastien. Merci Sébastien d'être là. Maxime a eu
Toujours.
un souci de dernière minute, donc il m'a envoyé un message, il ne pouvait pas être là. Mais non, voilà. Donc, il y a d'autres questions ou Caroline, as-tu une question?
Non, j'ai pas de questions particulières, mais merci beaucoup Marc-Antoine parce que c'est rare d'avoir de vrais conseils. En général, à chaque fois qu'on pose une question sur les taxes, on nous dit
C'est
parle à ton
toujours. Ah, ouais.
CPA, parle à ton
Oui,
financial
oui, oui.
advisor, parle. Donc c'est toujours très compliqué. Donc j'ai trouvé ça très clair et je pense que je vais te recontacter d'ici peu.
Ah, bah, c'est gentil. Non, c'est vrai que c'est toujours quelque chose qui est un peu délicat parce qu'ils ont pas envie de dire ah mais cette personne m'a dit là et tout ça. Mais mais en fin de compte, je veux dire c'est plus important d'avoir. Tu dis toujours en avance. D'ailleurs, je l'ai dit là en avance, disant c'est une présentation générale. C'est vraiment juste pour donner conseil général, mais c'est vrai qu'il y a beaucoup de choses qui sont précises et
Mais ne serait-ce que
avoir.
les avantages d'élire en S-Corp ou en C-Corp quand tu
Oui,
construis une nouvelle entreprise, je veux dire, c'est en général des conseils que nos CPA veulent jamais nous
ah, c'est
donner.
gentil.
Donc faites ce que vous
Oui,
voulez,
justement.
mais
Oui, parce que c'est très rare et j'ai l'impression que c'est souvent ce que j'entends
mm,
que euh, que justement c'est- leur CPA ou quelque chose comme ça ne veut pas euh, ne va pas de l'avant pour faire des conseils justement au niveau taxe parce que beaucoup de ce qu'on fait c'est vraiment faire la déclaration. Ah merci beaucoup Georges, ça c'est gentil.
Georges,
Ah, il
c'est
faut que
bon.
j'apprenne de Georges.
Ah ouais.
Maintenant j'aimerais bien qu'il ait un microphone, j'ai envie d'entendre entendre
Ben
sa
oui.
perspective. Mais c'est vrai que oui, c'est quelque chose que j'entends beaucoup, qu'il n'y a pas assez de planning sur ce que la personne veut faire, aller de l'avant. Parce qu'il y a le planning entrepreneurial, je dis, ah oui, il y a cette très bonne idée que j'ai envie de faire. Et en général, ils disent, ah très bien, vous faites comme vous voulez, nous on va voir vis-à-vis de ce que vous faites. Mais c'est toujours quelque chose à garder en compte. Et je sais que Sébastien, il est très fort là-dessus, de toujours garder un peu l'aspect taxe en tête d'un point de vue, OK, il y a investissement, c'est bien, ça peut gagner beaucoup, mais faut toujours regarder l'aspect taxe en tête et voir ce qui vaut la peine. Parce que oui, peut-être ça peut te sauvegarder un peu en taxe, mais après, il y a le coût administratif, c'est de faire une déclaration complètement séparée, un truc qui est très compliqué. J'avais quelqu'un, par exemple, qui était venu, il m'a dit, ah oui, j'avais cet avocat qui m'a fait créer une structure énorme, mais qui en fin de compte valait pas vraiment la peine parce que bon, il y avait beaucoup il y avait beaucoup de revenus qui passaient à travers une avenue, mais le reste c'était plus une protection légale. Mais après, ça faisait qu'il devait payer tellement en frais d'avocat, pas d'avocat, de comptable justement pour faire les déclarations parce que ça compliquait la chose pour pas grand-chose en fin de compte. Alors oui, peut-être qu'il y a la protection légale, ça, je vais pas dire que il n'a pas évité quelque chose en passant par cette avenue, mais c'est vrai que c'est quelque chose de très compréhensif et c'est toujours bien de pouvoir s'asseoir et d'un peu avoir cette idée. Et alors, genre, il va falloir que je me remette à l'allemand.
Exactement ça, en fait. Je pense,
Oui. Pardon, vas-y, Christine.
Je pense que ce qui nous manque dans l'expatriation, parce que moi j'ai pris quand même divers renseignements, c'est effectivement, on vous dit oui, bah, il y a telle taxe, il y a telle taxe, il y a telle taxe. Ok, on commence
Oui,
à les
mais qu'est-ce que
connaître au bout
ça
d'un
veut dire?
moment,
Voilà,
et on ne parle pas d'optimisation.
exactement.
On n'a pas l'impression de recevoir un vrai conseil d'optimisation, en fait. Voilà. Donc nous,
Ouais.
on est complètement novices et on n'a pas toutes les ficelles. Déjà en France, quand on a une société, on les a pas non plus. Alors
Oui, j'allais
encore
dire.
moins dans un voilà, c'est pas toujours simple à maîtriser. Et là,
Ouais.
effectivement, moi, ce que je trouve, c'est effectivement toujours des gens qui vous disent, alors oui, vous avez une LLC, vous allez payer ça, vous allez faire ci, mais à un moment où est le conseil de comment j'optimise. Et c'est ce que vous
Exact.
avez commencé à nous annoncer tout à l'heure, hein, vous en
Ouais.
avez parlé et tout. Et c'est ça qui est important, en fait. C'est ça
C'est
que l'on
très important.
souhaite.
C'est pour ça, c'est toujours bien d'avoir la
Voilà.
conversation avec pour que moi j'ai un peu une idée d'où vous venez, ce que vous voulez faire et comment aller de l'avant de manière qui fait le plus de sens pour vous ultimement.
Exactement.
Mais,
Super.
euh, mais pour revenir à Georges, il faut que je me remette à l'allemand. J'ai dû l'apprendre pendant 8 ans quand j'étais en Suisse. Et ça a toujours été un professeur francophone qui me l'apprenait, donc c'est jamais vraiment resté. Euh, et j'avais passé, je crois, 2 semaines en programme d'échange quand j'étais à l'école. Et c'est à ce moment-là où j'ai vraiment pu apprendre parce que la famille d'échange ne parlait ni anglais ni français, c'était juste de l'allemand. Donc j'ai dû me, j'ai dû me débrouiller pour communiquer avec eux. Et en ces 2 semaines, j'ai l'impression que je m'étais bien amélioré. Et après, je suis venu aux États-Unis où il n'y avait plus du tout d'allemand, donc c'était un peu dur de
Il y
garder
a,
ça.
il y a- il y a une grosse population allemande. La seule chose, c'est qu'ils parlent tous très bien anglais. Donc, on n'a pas
Oui,
vraiment
justement, c'est
l'occasion de
dur.
parler allemand. Parce que moi aussi, je parle
Ah,
couramment
la Suisse
allemand.
romande.
Et on n'a pas l'occasion parce que dès que tu commences et ils voient que
Ils veulent tout de suite. Oui, oui.
tu
Mais c'est parce
enclenches
qu'ils
en
sont trop
anglais.
gentils. Ils
Mhm.
sont trop gentils. J'ai un voisin allemand, justement, j'essaie de m'entraîner un peu avec lui, d'entraîner mon fils aussi. Sprechen Sie Deutsch? Ja, jawohl. Faut que je garde
OK.
l'accent suisse qui va avec. Mais
Très bien. Y a-t-il d'autres questions?
Moi, j'en ai une dernière, Marc-Antoine, si tu veux bien.
oui, bien sûr.
Si on a moyennement confiance en son CPA, je sais qu'on peut regarder les taxes en arrière
Oui.
et peut-être obtenir des crédits ou des remboursements. Est-ce qu'on est sur 5 ans en arrière ou est-ce que c'est moins? Est-ce que tu...
C'est-à-dire 5 ans en arrière sur.
Sur les précédentes taxes que l'on a déposées les 5 dernières années, est-ce qu'on peut revenir en arrière sur les 5 dernières années, réanalyser
Ah,
et
réanalyser. Alors,
demander à être...
ça dépend. Alors,
mhm.
c'est soit 3 ans, soit 6 ans. Et
OK.
ça dépend sur ce qui s'appelle le Statute of Limitation.
Mhm.
Et ça peut être un processus qui prend. Ça, c'est autre chose qu'il faut vraiment analyser, dire, OK, est-ce que ça vaut la peine? S'il y a vraiment quelque chose qui a été vraiment raté, où il faut retourner beaucoup d'années en arrière, ça peut valoir la peine,
Mhm.
mais ça va prendre beaucoup de temps pour que l'IRS fasse en sorte que la chose soit analysée, notamment maintenant, parce que l'IRS, on va dire depuis de nombreuses années, reçoit de moins en moins de fonds. Et on se dit, bon, on n'aime pas tellement l'IRS, qu'est-ce que ça. Je s'en fous. Mais le problème avec ça, c'est que beaucoup de choses sont backed up. Ah, ciao Seb, à tout à l'heure, on discute
Ouais.
après. Mais il y a beaucoup de choses qui sont mises en arrière d'une manière processus, on va dire, où l'IRS n'est. Je veux dire, j'avais un client qui attendait encore que sa déclaration de 2020 soit processed. Et c'était une année assez critique parce il a reçu comme salaire des actions de sa société ou quelque chose comme ça. Il avait fait des élections particulières où il fallait justement que je sache ce qui s'était passé. Et il avait plus sa déclaration et j'avais pas moyen de demander à l'IRS parce qu'il n'avait pas fini de compléter la requête. Donc, une fois qu'on fait justement ce qui s'appelle le amendment,
Mhm.
ça peut prendre l'IRS un bout de temps avant que, on va dire que les changements soient reconnus et aillent de l'avant.
OK.
Mais encore une fois, c'est quelque chose absolument qu'on peut analyser. S'il y a vraiment, je pense qu'il y a vraiment quelque chose qui a été raté pendant toutes ces années, que ça vaut la peine de retourner et de faire le changement, absolument. Moi, je
OK.
dis, on peut y aller,
Ça marche. Merci.
bien sûr.
Très bien. Mais écoute, c'était très, très bien. Merci beaucoup, Marc-Antoine. Et je pense que tout le monde a noté et verra le recording sur le site framco.org. Comme ça, si vous avez des questions, vous pouvez le contacter directement. Donc, merci à tout le monde. Merci Marc-Antoine pour cette super présentation.
C'est
Et
gentil. Merci à Betty.
j'espère vous voir très bientôt, le mois prochain, sur
À
notre...
très bientôt. Je serai là la prochaine fois. Désolé de ne pas avoir été là hier. J'étais préoccupé
Non,
avec le
il n'y
nouveau
a,
bébé.
il y a pas de souci et félicitations encore pour la petite fille.
Merci, merci.
Ok.
C'est
À
gentil.
bientôt. Bon week-end
Merci à
à
tous.
tous. Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.